The studio lights blazed, casting sharp shadows across the desk where Mark Levin sat, his voice booming through the airwaves. "Let's get real here," he declared, waving a dismissive hand. "We've got people like Jasmine Crockett parading around with so-called law degrees, pretending they know the Constitution better than those of us who've spent decades defending it." He let out a short, incredulous laugh, the kind meant to sting, not amuse. "I mean, does anyone actually believe she's qualified to lecture America on the law?" The camera cut to Jasmine Crockett, her face framed in a split screen. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Her eyes were steady, her lips pressed in a line of quiet resolve. Around her, the world seemed to pause. Viewers at home leaned in, some with outrage, others with anticipation, all of them sensing that something bigger was unfolding. Levin pressed on, his tone dripping with condescension. "It's one thing to have a piece of paper from a law school. It's another to actually understand what it means. I'd love to see her try to back up half the things she says with real evidence. But I won't hold my breath." He smirked, certain he'd landed the blow, certain the audience was on his side. But the silence that followed was not surrender. It was the calm before a storm. Crockett's supporters watched, their anger simmering, their hope flickering. Her critics waited for her to falter, to stumble, to prove Levin right. The tension was electric, the stakes suddenly personal for everyone who'd ever been doubted, dismissed, or told they didn't belong. The world held its breath, waiting for her response. But no one watching on either side was prepared for what happened next. This was more than a spat between a talk show host and a congresswoman. It was a collision of worlds, one built on decades of gatekeeping, the other rising from the lived experience of those who had always been told to wait their turn. In that studio, the stakes were nothing less than the right to define who gets to speak for America. Across the country, trust in expertise was under siege. The airwaves were crowded with voices like Mark Levin's, loud, certain, and quick to dismiss anyone who didn't fit the mold. For years, Levin had built his brand on the idea that only a select few truly understood the Constitution, that only the old guard could be trusted to interpret the law. He was the voice of establishment arrogance, a man who wielded his credentials like a weapon and treated dissent as a personal affront. But America was changing. In city halls and classrooms, in immigrant households and on college campuses, a new generation was demanding a seat at the table. They saw themselves in Jasmine Crockett, not just because of her story, but because of her courage to speak truth to power. She was the voice of a new, diverse America, a woman who had earned her law degree not as a birthright, but as a battle scar. She carried with her the hopes of those who had been dismissed, doubted, and denied. The tension in the studio was more than personal. It was generational, cultural, and deeply political. Levin's scoff wasn't just about Crockett's credentials. It was about who gets to question authority, who gets to define justice, who gets to belong. For every immigrant who had been told their accent was a liability, for every woman who had been told to smile and nod, for every young person who had been told to wait their turn, this moment was a test. Would the old rules hold? Or would a new voice finally break through? Crockett's calm was not just composure, it was defiance. She knew what was at stake. She knew that every word, every pause, every look would be dissected by millions. She knew that her response would not just be about her, but about everyone who had ever been underestimated. The cameras captured it all, the tension, the hope, the simmering outrage. Social media buzzed with anticipation. Commentators whispered that this was the moment the old guard would finally be challenged, that the world was about to see what happens when dignity meets arrogance head-on, because what happened in the next few minutes would send shockwaves far beyond the studio. But to understand the true weight of this clash, you have to know who these two really are. To understand the force Jasmine Crockett was up against, you have to step into the world of Mark Levin, a world built on bluster, calculation, and a relentless drive to dominate the airwaves. Levin's story isn't one of humble beginnings or hard-fought battles for a seat at the table. It's a story of a man who learned early that the loudest voice often wins, and who spent his life making sure his was the loudest of all. Levin's rise was no accident. He started as a legal advisor in the Reagan administration, learning the art of political maneuvering from the masters. He watched how power was wielded behind closed doors, how narratives were shaped, and how dissent was crushed. When he transitioned to talk radio, he brought that same ruthlessness with him. He didn't just want to inform, he wanted to dominate, to drown out every voice that didn't echo his own. His show became a fortress for the old guard, a place where the rules were simple. Levin was right, and everyone else was either misguided or malicious. He built his brand on outrage, on the idea that America was under siege from within, and that only a select few, himself included, could save it. He railed against elites while cultivating his own elite status, decrying media bias even as he shaped the narrative to suit his agenda. But beneath the bluster, there was something else, a deep-seated arrogance, a belief that credentials were only valid if they matched his worldview. Levin was quick to question the legitimacy of others' expertise, especially when it came from women, people of color, or anyone who challenged the status quo. He dismissed degrees, mocked lived experience, and wielded his own legal background like a club. For Levin, the law wasn't a tool for justice, it was a weapon for gatekeeping. There were moments when the mask slipped. Listeners recall the times he cut off callers mid-sentence, refusing to let them finish if their arguments threatened his narrative. He was known to shout down guests, to belittle those who disagreed, to turn every debate into a spectacle of dominance. His critics saw it as insecurity masquerading as strength, a desperate need to be the smartest man in the room. Levin's hypocrisy was never far from the surface. He railed against cancel culture, yet routinely used his platform to silence and smear those he disagreed with. He claimed to champion free speech, but only for those who echoed his views. He spoke of respect for the Constitution, but twisted its words to fit his own agenda, cherry-picking history to justify his positions. The double standards were glaring, but Levin brushed them aside with a wave of his hand and a booming laugh. For years, he got away with it. The establishment protected its own, and Levin was a master at playing the game. He weathered scandals, sidestepped accountability, and emerged each time with his audience more loyal than ever. To many, he seemed untouchable, a fixture of the old order, too entrenched to be moved. But beneath the surface, frustration was building. People were tired of the arrogance, the double standards, the endless gatekeeping. They were tired of being told to wait, to be patient, to accept less. They were looking for someone who would call out the hypocrisy, who would refuse to play by the old rules. And on this day, in this studio, Mark Levin was about to face something he'd never faced before. A challenge he couldn't dismiss, a voice he couldn't silence, a truth he couldn't spin. The world was watching, and for the first time the old playbook might not be enough. But while Levin built his brand on bluster, Jasmine Crockett's journey was forged in the fire of real-world struggle. Jasmine Crockett's story doesn't begin in the spotlight. It begins in a small, bustling neighborhood, where dreams were often deferred but never extinguished. She was raised by parents who worked long hours and longer nights, who taught her that dignity wasn't something you waited for. It was something you carried, even when the world tried to strip it away. Her mother, a nurse, and her father, a mechanic, poured every ounce of hope into their daughter, telling her that education was her ticket to a life they could only imagine. School was Jasmine's first proving ground. She was the only black girl in her advanced classes, the one whose hand shot up with answers, whose questions were met with side eyes and whispers. Teachers praised her intelligence but warned her not to be too assertive. Classmates challenged her right to be there, as if her presence was a mistake. Jasmine learned early that she would have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. She studied late into the night, fueled by her parents' sacrifices and her own stubborn belief that she belonged. College was supposed to be a fresh start, but the challenges only grew sharper. She faced professors who doubted her, advisors who steered her away from ambition, and peers who saw her as a token. She worked nights to pay tuition, sent money home when she could, and still found time to organize protests and volunteer at legal clinics. Every obstacle was a reminder. The world would not make room for her. She would have to carve out her own space. Law school was a crucible. Jasmine was one of a handful of women of color in her class, and the pressure was relentless. She was told to tone it down, to wait her turn, to be grateful for the opportunity. But she knew that silence was complicity. She spoke up in class, challenged professors, and demanded that the law serve everyone, not just the privileged few. She graduated with honors, but more importantly, she left with a mission: to fight for those who had been told to wait, to be quiet, to accept less. Her career began in the trenches. As a public defender, Jasmine saw firsthand the cruelty of a system stacked against the poor, the black, the immigrant, the forgotten. She sat with mothers who couldn't afford bail, with teenagers facing decades behind bars for minor offenses, with families torn apart by policies written by people who would never know their names. She fought for every client as if they were her own family, because in so many ways they were. She lost cases she should have won cases she was told were hopeless, and earned a reputation as a fighter, relentless, compassionate, and unafraid. But the victories came at a cost. Jasmine faced threats, harassment, and relentless scrutiny. She was called angry, difficult, unprofessional, all the words used to put black women in their place. She was passed over for promotions, excluded from meetings, and told again and again that she didn't belong. But every setback only sharpened her resolve. She knew that her fight was bigger than her own career. She was fighting for every girl who had ever been told she was too much, every family who had ever been told they were not enough. When she ran for office, the odds were stacked against her. She had no wealthy donors, no powerful backers, no family name to open doors. What she had was a community that believed in her, a record of service, and a voice that refused to be silenced. She knocked on doors, listened to stories, and promised to bring those voices into the halls of power. Her campaign was dismissed as a long shot, a footnote in the political season. But Jasmine knew that underdogs don't just play the game, they change it. Her victory was more than a personal triumph. It was a message to every person who had ever felt invisible. You matter, you belong, and your voice can change the world. In Congress, Jasmine brought the same fire, the same compassion, the same refusal to accept the status quo. She challenged colleagues, demanded accountability, and spoke truth to power even when it made her a target. But what truly set Jasmine apart was her composure. In the face of insults, she stood tall. When dismissed, she doubled down. She understood that every attack was not just about her. It was about everyone she represented. She carried the weight of her community, her ancestors, and every person who had ever been told to wait their turn. She turned pain into purpose and purpose into power. And that's why, when the attack came, she didn't just survive, she made history. The studio lights seemed to burn brighter as Mark Levin leaned forward, his voice rising with each word. "Let's not kid ourselves, Congresswoman," he sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. "You can wave your law degree around all you want, but that doesn't mean you understand the Constitution. I've spent my life defending it. You're just another politician using big words to impress people who don't know any better." A ripple of tension moved through the room. Crockett's allies, watching from behind the scenes and from living rooms across the country, exchanged worried glances. They'd seen this tactic before, an old guard lion circling, ready to pounce. Her opponents, meanwhile, smirked, convinced they were witnessing a takedown. The audience at home was on edge, some holding their breath, others bracing for the worst. Levin pressed on, his words growing sharper. "You talk about justice, but what have you actually delivered? You talk about the people, but all I see is someone obsessed with the spotlight. You're not here to serve, you're here to be seen." He gestured dismissively as if brushing away a nuisance. "The American people deserve substance, not sound bites. They deserve wisdom, not grandstanding." Crockett sat perfectly still, her face a mask of composure. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. The contrast was stark. Levin, red-faced and animated, his words tumbling over each other in a rush to wound. Crockett, still as stone, her calm unbroken. The cameras caught every detail, the tightening of Levin's jaw, the steady set of Crockett's eyes, the way the energy in the room shifted with each passing second. Levin, sensing victory, pressed even harder. "You claim to represent the people, but you don't speak for me. You don't speak for the millions of Americans who are tired of this circus. You're not a leader, you're a distraction." His words hung in the air, heavy and final. For a moment, it seemed as if the old order had reasserted itself, as if the gatekeepers had slammed the door shut once more. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. Crockett's allies held their breath. Her opponents waited for her to falter, and the audience at home leaned in, hearts pounding. But Crockett didn't falter. She didn't blink. She let the silence stretch, letting Levin's words echo and fade. The power in the room shifted, almost imperceptibly, as if everyone sensed that something was about to break. Levin, growing agitated, tried one last time to rattle her. "So tell us, Congresswoman, what makes you think you know better than the experts? What makes you think your so-called evidence is worth anything at all?" But then, with the nation watching, Jasmine Crockett reached for the evidence and everything changed. Jasmine Crockett's hand hovered over the folder on the desk, her fingers steady, her gaze unwavering. The studio was silent, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Levin's words still hung in the air, but their power was already fading, replaced by a new, electric anticipation. Crockett's allies watched, hope flickering in their eyes. Her opponents leaned forward, eager for a stumble. The nation waited. She drew a breath, slow and deliberate, letting the tension build. Then, with a voice as clear as glass, she began. "Mr. Levin, I appreciate your concern for my legal education. It's always interesting to hear lectures on constitutional law from someone who's spent decades behind a microphone, not in a courtroom." A ripple moved through the studio, some gasps, some stifled laughter. Levin's jaw tightened, but Crockett pressed on, her words measured, each one landing with precision. "You ask what I've delivered? Let's talk about that." She opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents. "Here are court records from cases I've argued and won, cases where real people's lives were on the line. Here are amicus briefs I've written, cited by judges across the country. Here are letters from clients who had no one else to fight for them. This isn't theory, Mr. Levin. This is lived experience." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The cameras zoomed in, catching the flicker of doubt in Levin's eyes. Crockett's voice softened, but her resolve only grew stronger. "You say I'm obsessed with the spotlight, but the only reason there's a spotlight on me is because I refuse to let injustice hide in the shadows. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's because you're used to a world where people like me are supposed to stay quiet." A murmur swept through the studio. On social media, the moment was already catching fire. Tweets flew. "She's speaking for all of us. This is what courage looks like." Hashtags began to trend. Crockett clapped back on truth to power. Mech drop moment. Crockett leaned in, her eyes never leaving Levin's. "You talk about leadership. But real leaders don't tear people down to build themselves up. Real leaders listen. Real leaders serve. Real leaders know that their job is to open doors, not slam them shut." Levin shifted in his seat, his confidence slipping. The smirks on his allies' faces faded, replaced by uncertainty. Crockett's allies sat up straighter, pride shining in their eyes. The audience at home could feel the shift. The underdog was no longer on the defensive. She was in control. Crockett continued, her voice rising with conviction. "You want to talk about results? Let's talk about results. I've helped pass legislation that puts food on families' tables, that keeps kids in school, that gives people a second chance. I've worked with people who don't look like me, who don't agree with me, because I know that progress doesn't come from division. It comes from unity." She paused again, letting the silence speak. The studio was rapt, every eye fixed on her. Levin looked away, his bravado crumbling. Crockett's words were not just a defense. They were an indictment, a mirror held up to the old guard's hypocrisy. On Twitter, the memes exploded. A split screen of Levin's stunned face and Crockett's calm defiance. GIFs of mic drops, of fireworks, of crowds cheering. Commentators rushed to weigh in. "This is a masterclass in composure." She just rewrote the rules. History in the making. Crockett's voice softened, but her words cut deeper. "You say I don't speak for you. That's fine. I speak for the people who've been ignored, dismissed, and told to wait their turn. I speak for the families who can't afford to wait. I speak for the future you keep trying to hold back." A hush fell, deeper than before. Even Levin's staunchest supporters were silent, their certainty shaken. Crockett's allies exchanged glances of awe, some blinking back tears. The audience at home felt it too, A surge of pride, of validation, of hope. Crockett finished, her voice steady and sure. You can attack my record, my motives, my very presence in this studio. But you can't erase the truth. I am here, I belong here, and I will not be silenced, not by you, not by anyone. The studio erupted not in chaos, but in a wave of energy. Some applauded, others sat in stunned silence. Levin tried to recover, but the moment was gone. The power had shifted, and everyone knew it. Outside the studio, the world reacted in real time. News alerts flashed. Crockett's response goes viral. Influencers posted reaction videos, their faces lit up with excitement. Young people shared clips, adding their own stories of being underestimated, of fighting to be heard. The hashtags soared, the memes multiplied, and the message was clear. Something had changed. Commentators on both sides scrambled to respond. Some tried to downplay the moment, calling it just another debate. But the truth was undeniable. Crockett's words had cut through the noise, had reached beyond the walls of the studio, had spoken to a nation hungry for authenticity, for courage, for a new kind of leadership. In living rooms and classrooms, in break rooms and on buses, people watched and rewatched the clip. They saw themselves in Crockett's calm, in her fire, in her refusal to back down. They felt the sting of Levin's words, but they also felt the power of Crockett's response, a power that came not from anger, but from truth. As the echoes of her words faded, the studio was stunned. But the real explosion was just beginning online. The moment Jasmine Crockett's words left her lips, the world outside the studio erupted. Within seconds, the clip was everywhere. On Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and group chats from coast to coast. Hashtags blazed across screens. Crockett clapback, on law degree legend. Hot truth to power. The video racked up millions of views in minutes, each replay fueling a new wave of energy. Memes exploded into existence. One showed Crockett's poised face superimposed over a roaring lion. The caption, unbothered, unbreakable, unmatched. Another looped Levin's stunned reaction, paired with the words, when the old guard meets the new. TikTokers reenacted the exchange, some with tears in their eyes, others with laughter, all with a sense of vindication. The internet had found its hero and its villain. Commentators scrambled to keep up. Progressive voices called it the moment the tables turned, a masterclass in dignity, the future of American leadership. Even some centrist pundits, usually cautious, admitted Crockett's composure was undeniable. She didn't just defend herself, she inspired a movement. On cable news, the clip played on a loop, anchors marveling at the clarity and force of her words. But the impact didn't stop at headlines or hot takes. In classrooms, teachers played the video, asking students what courage looks like. In community centers, organizers replayed the moment, using it to rally volunteers and remind them why their voices matter. Young activists posted their own stories, tagging Crockett, thanking her for showing that you can stand tall, even when the world tries to cut you down. Marginalized voices found new strength. Immigrant families, long told to keep their heads down, shared the clip with pride. She speaks for us, one mother wrote, her post going viral. For every time we've been told to wait, to be quiet, to accept less today, we saw what's possible. Black and brown girls posted side-by-side photos, Crockett at the mic, themselves in classrooms, on stages, in boardrooms. We belong, they wrote. We are not afraid. Even some political opponents, caught off guard by the tidal wave of support, offered grudging respect. You have to hand it to her, one conservative commentator tweeted. She stood her ground. That's leadership, whether you agree with her or not. Others, less gracious, tried to spin the moment, but their words were drowned out by the sheer volume of praise. Meanwhile, Levin faced a backlash he hadn't anticipated. His supporters tried to rally, but the narrative had shifted. Editorials questioned his tactics, late-night hosts lampooned his arrogance, and even some of his colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with a losing fight. The old playbook, dismiss, belittle, move on, suddenly seemed outdated, powerless against the force of Crockett's authenticity. Celebrities joined the chorus. A-list actors tweeted their support. Musicians dedicated songs to Standing Your Ground. Athletes wore shirts emblazoned with Crockett's words. The ripple effect was undeniable. What had started as a tense exchange in a studio had become a cultural moment, a rallying cry for anyone who had ever felt unseen. But the most powerful validation came from everyday people. A young woman in Detroit posted, "I watched that clip with my mom. We cried. We've never seen someone like us stand up like that and win." A teacher in Texas wrote, "My students are talking about Congress for the first time. They see themselves in Jasmine Crockett." A retired veteran in California commented, "I may not agree with her politics, but I respect her courage." That's what America is supposed to be about. The backlash against Levin grew. Petitions circulated demanding accountability. Editorials called for a new kind of leadership, one rooted in service, not self-preservation. The old guard felt the ground shift beneath their feet, the certainty of their power suddenly in question. Yet, as the headlines multiplied and the memes spread, something deeper was happening. The conversation was changing. People weren't just talking about a viral moment. They were talking about what it meant, about who gets to speak, who gets to lead, who gets to define the future. Crockett's response had become more than a comeback. It was a spark, igniting questions that had simmered for generations. But beyond the headlines, this moment sparked a deeper conversation about who we are as a nation. In the days that followed, Jasmine Crockett's words echoed far beyond the studio. She didn't just win an argument, she reframed the entire conversation. When asked about the confrontation, she didn't gloat or attack. Instead, she spoke with the same calm conviction that had carried her through the storm. "This was never about me," she said. "It's about what we choose to value as a country. Do we reward arrogance or do we honor dignity? Do we serve our egos or do we serve each other?" Her message resonated because it was bigger than politics. It was about the daily battles fought by millions, immigrants who work twice as hard for half the recognition, women who are told to be quiet, young people who are told to wait their turn. Crockett's story became a mirror, reflecting the struggles and hopes of a nation still wrestling with its own identity. She reminded America that dignity is not something granted by the powerful. It's something claimed by the courageous. "You don't have to be in Congress to stand up for what's right," she told a crowd of students. "You don't have to have a title to make a difference. Every time you choose truth over comfort, every time you lift someone up instead of tearing them down, you are shaping the future of this country." Crockett's journey, forged in adversity, became a testament to resilience. She spoke of her parents' sacrifices, of the teachers who doubted her, of the doors that were slammed in her face. But she also spoke of hope, the hope that comes from refusing to accept less, from believing that justice is possible, from knowing that every voice matters. "America is not perfect," she said, "but it is ours to shape. Every generation gets to decide what kind of country we will be." Her words inspired a new wave of activism. Young people registered to vote in record numbers. Community leaders organized town halls, using Crockett's story as a rallying cry. Families gathered around dinner tables talking about what it means to stand up for dignity, to demand justice, to believe in hope even when the odds are long. Crockett's example became a blueprint for courage. She showed that you can face down hate without becoming hateful, that you can answer arrogance with grace, that you can meet power with truth. She reminded the nation that service is not about self-promotion, it's about lifting others up, about leaving the world better than you found it. And in that lesson, people found themselves. They saw their own struggles reflected in hers, their own dreams validated by her victory. They realized that the fight for dignity and representation is not just for the few. It's for everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. As the dust settled, one thing was clear. The future belongs to those who stand tall, even when the world tries to tear them down. So when Mark Levin doubted Jasmine Crockett's law degree, he thought he could dismiss her, diminish her, and silence a new voice. Instead, he sparked a moment that reminded America what real leadership looks like. Crockett didn't just defend her credentials, she defended the dignity of everyone who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told they don't belong. This wasn't just a viral exchange. It was a turning point, a reminder that the old playbook of arrogance and exclusion is no match for the courage of those who refuse to back down. Crockett's story is proof that when you stand tall, when you speak your truth, you don't just survive. You inspire others to do the same. If you felt seen, if you felt empowered, if you believe that America is strongest when every voice is heard, then this is your moment too. Don't let it end here. Subscribe to this channel, share this story, and join a community that believes in justice, representation, and the power of truth. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And together we can build a future where dignity always triumphs over hate. Because the next time power tries to silence truth, it might just be your voice that changes everything.